I opened the door with the new key still warm in my hand, and there they were, her back against the kitchen counter I'd paid for, his hands on her waist, their mouths locked together like they'd done this before. The box I was carrying hit the floor. They didn't hear it. I stood there in the doorway of the apartment I'd bled for, watching my girlfriend kiss my Uncle Jerome, the man I'd let sleep on our couch for 2 weeks after the flooding took his place on Riverside. The afternoon light came through the window we'd picked out together, falling across them like a spotlight on everything I'd been too tired to see. My chest went hollow. My hands went cold. They still hadn't noticed me standing there, 10 feet away, holding the rest of my life in cardboard boxes stacked in the hallway behind me. My name is William, and this is my revenge story. But before we continue, don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave a comment with the city you're watching from. It really helps me bring you more stories. I'd work the morning shift at the warehouse, the afternoon doing Instacart runs, the night stocking shelves at the grocery store on Martin Luther King Boulevard. 16-hour days, 6 days a week, for 8 months straight just to scrape together first month, last month, and deposit on this place. Tasha said she wanted something that was ours, something with her name on the lease, something that proved I was serious about our future. I gave her that. I gave her everything I had left after my mama died and the medical bills took the house. And Jerome, Uncle Jerome, who used to take me fishing when I was 10, who showed up at Mama's funeral with red eyes and a flask. I'd given him shelter when the water came. I'd given him my couch, my food, my trust. They broke apart. Tasha smoothed her shirt. Jerome ran his hand through his gray-streaked hair and grinned at something she whispered. I took 1 step back into the hallway, silent, my heart slamming against my ribs. Neither of them turned around. I picked up the box I'd dropped, carried it back downstairs to my car, and sat behind the wheel with my hand shaking on the steering wheel. The rational part of my brain said, go back up there and confront them. The other part, the part that had watched my father walk out when I was 12, the part that had held Mama's hand when the cancer won, that part told me to wait, to watch, to learn what I was really dealing with before I made a single move. I drove to the far end of the parking lot and called my boy Devin. He picked up on the second ring, heard something in my voice and said he'd be there in 20. I didn't tell him what I saw. I just told him I needed eyes on my place for a few days, told him I'd explain later, told him to trust me. Devin had been my friend since high school, the kind of man who showed up when you called and asked questions later. He worked security, had access to cameras, knew how to be invisible. When he pulled up in his Honda, I handed him the spare key I'd had made for emergencies and told him to install a camera in the living room while they were gone. He looked at me hard, started to ask, then just nodded. That's brotherhood. I went back to work that night like nothing happened. Stocked shelves, smiled at customers, counted inventory until my manager told me I could go home. But I didn't go home. I sat in my car in the grocery store parking lot and ate cold fried chicken from the deli, staring at my phone, waiting for Devin's text. It came at 11:30. Done. Link sent. You good? I wasn't good. I hadn't been good since I was 17 and the world started taking things from me. But I typed back, yeah, thanks, bro. Then I opened the camera app and watched the empty living room of the apartment I'd worked myself half to death for, waiting to see what else I'd been too blind to notice. The next morning, I showed up at the apartment with coffee and breakfast sandwiches, smiling like a man in love. Tasha kissed my cheek. Jerome was on the couch in his boxers and my Old Saints t-shirt, watching SportsCenter. I handed him a sandwich and asked how he slept. He said fine, said the couch was comfortable, said he appreciated me looking out for family. I nodded and told him to take his time finding a new place, told him we had space, told him blood was blood. Tasha smiled at me like I was the best man she'd ever known. I smiled back. Inside, I was already gone. Inside, I was someone else now. Someone patient, someone cold, someone who understood that the best revenge doesn't announce itself. I started keeping a journal that night. Names, dates, times, screenshots, everything. I documented every lie Tasha told me about where she'd been. I saved every text Jerome sent asking when I'd be home late. I watched the camera feed during my breaks at work and saw them in my home, on my couch, in my kitchen, playing house while I paid for the roof over their heads. Devin checked in every few days, asking if I was sure about what I was doing, asking if I needed backup. I told him I was sure. I told him this wasn't about fists or fury. This was about showing them exactly who they'd underestimated. This was about making them feel what I felt, standing in that doorway with a box in my hands and my whole world crashing down. The camera caught them 3 more times that first week, always in the afternoon, always when I was supposed to be at the warehouse. On Wednesday, I watched Jerome pour wine into the glasses I'd bought for Tasha's birthday. On Friday, I watched them slow dance in the living room to music I couldn't hear through the silent feed. On Sunday, while I was doing my Instacart runs, I watched Tasha sit on his lap and feed him strawberries from the container I'd left in the fridge. Each time, I saved the footage. Each time, I went to work and pretended I didn't know. Each time, I felt something inside me calcify into something harder than anger. Tasha started acting different around me. Softer, more affectionate, guilty in a way she tried to hide with extra attention. She'd make my plate at dinner without me asking. She'd rub my shoulders while I counted my tip money at the kitchen table. She'd tell me how proud she was of how hard I worked, how we were building something real together. I'd nod and kiss her forehead and feel nothing but the weight of her lies pressing down on my chest. Jerome got comfortable. He started leaving his things around the apartment like he lived there. His shoes by the door, his razor in the bathroom, his coffee mug in the sink every morning. I worked my 3 jobs like a machine, but I started making changes. I opened a new bank account at a different bank, one Tasha didn't know about, and started depositing my Instacart and grocery store money there. The warehouse checks still went into our joint account, enough to cover rent and bills, enough to keep her from asking questions. I told her I was picking up extra shifts to save for a ring. She cried and hugged me and said she couldn't wait to be my wife. Jerome clapped me on the shoulder and said I was doing it right, taking care of my woman. I smiled at both of them and felt my stomach turn over. Devin came by on a Tuesday night when he knew they'd be there. I'd told him to. Told him I needed a witness to how things looked from the outside. He brought beer and acted like he was just checking in on his boy. Tasha was sweet to him, offered him food, asked about his daughter. Jerome shook his hand and talked about the Saints' chances this season. We all sat in the living room like a normal family, like everything was fine, like I didn't have hours of footage on my phone showing 2 of them together. When Devin left, he texted me. I see it now. The way she looks at him when you're not watching. The way he looks at her. I'm sorry, T. I didn't need his apology. I needed his patience. My supervisor at the warehouse, a white man named Rick who'd never liked me much, started writing me harder about my productivity. He'd stand over my shoulder with his clipboard, timing how long it took me to load pallets, writing down every bathroom break. I knew what he was doing. Trying to find a reason to fire me. Trying to open up my position for someone cheaper, or someone he liked better. I didn't give him anything. I showed up early, stayed late, never complained, never argued. I made myself indispensable. When he asked me to work the overnight shift on Thanksgiving, I said yes. I needed the money anyway. I needed every dollar I could scrape together for what was coming. Tasha asked me to take Jerome to look at apartments the weekend before Thanksgiving. She said he needed help, said he didn't have a car, said family helped family. I agreed. We drove around the city for 3 hours, looking at places he couldn't afford on his disability check. He talked the whole time about starting over, about getting his life back together, about how grateful he was that I'd given him a place to land. I listened and nodded and asked him questions about what he wanted in a place. He never asked about me. He never asked if I was tired, if I was stressed, if I needed anything. He just talked about himself, the way men like him always do, assuming the people holding them up are strong enough to carry the weight forever. That night, I watched the camera feed from the warehouse break room. Jerome had stayed at the apartment while Tasha went to her mother's house. He went through my things. opened drawers in the bedroom, looked at the mail on the counter, checked the balance on a bank statement I'd left out on purpose, the joint account, the one that looked like it held everything I had. He took a picture of it with his phone. I watched him do it, watched him smile to himself, watched him pour another glass of my whiskey and sit back on my couch like he owned the place. That's when I knew for certain this wasn't just about Tasha. This was about money. This was about him thinking he'd found an easy mark. I started documenting everything with timestamps and notes. Every time Jerome used my Netflix account. Every time he ate my food. Every time he used my Wi-Fi to browse apartment listings he had no intention of renting. I kept receipts for everything I bought for the apartment. I screenshotted every Venmo request I sent Tasha for her half of the bills. Requests she'd stopped paying 2 months ago without me saying anything about it. I was building a case, brick by brick, detail by detail, because when this was over, I wanted them to see exactly how much they'd taken from me. I wanted them to feel the weight of their betrayal in dollars and cents and documented lies. And I wanted them to know I'd watched them do it, every single step of the way. Thanksgiving morning, I worked my shift at the warehouse while Tasha and Jerome stayed at the apartment. She'd told me her mother invited us for dinner at 3, told me to come straight from work so we wouldn't be late. I clocked out at noon, sat in my car, and opened the camera feed. They were cooking together in my kitchen, my uncle and my girlfriend, laughing and drinking wine while a turkey I'd paid for roasted in the oven. Jerome grabbed her from behind while she was chopping vegetables. She leaned into him. They kissed like people who'd forgotten they were supposed to be hiding. I closed the app and drove to the store. I bought flowers for Tasha's mother, a pecan pie from the bakery, and a bottle of bourbon I couldn't afford. Then I went home and walked into the apartment smiling, carrying my offerings like a man who had everything to be thankful for. The turkey was on the counter, cooling. Tasha was in the shower. Jerome was on the couch, changed into clean clothes, scrolling through his phone. I asked him if he wanted to ride with us to her mother's house. He said yes. I told him we'd leave in 30 minutes. Then I went to the bedroom and changed my shirt while Tasha sang behind the bathroom door. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the man looking back. Dinner at Miss Patricia's house was exactly what I expected. Her small home in the 7th Ward smelled like gravy and greens. Tasha's younger sister was there with her new boyfriend, some kid who worked at a call center and talked too much. Ms. Patricia hugged me tight and told me I looked thin, told me I was working too hard, told me to make sure I ate. She liked me. She'd always liked me. She didn't know her daughter was sleeping with my blood. I sat at the table and carved the turkey and made small talk and felt like I was watching myself from outside my body. Jerome sat across from me, laughing at someone's joke, drinking my bourbon, comfortable in a way that made my jaw tight. After dinner, while the women cleaned up in the kitchen, Jerome pulled me aside on the back porch. He put his hand on my shoulder and told me I was a good man, told me Tasha was lucky to have me, told me I reminded him of my father before things went wrong. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a man who thought he was clever, a man who thought he'd gotten away with something, a man who'd forgotten that I was my father's son, and my father had taught me one thing before he left. Trust is a weapon people use against you if you let them. I thanked Jerome for the kind words. I told him I was glad he was doing better. I lied as smoothly as he did. I drove us back to the apartment after dark. Tasha fell asleep in the passenger seat, full of her mama's cooking and wine. Jerome sat in the back, quiet for once, staring out the window at the city lights. I thought about driving us into the lake. I thought about a lot of things in those 15 minutes, but I kept my hands steady on the wheel and my eyes on the road. Because this wasn't about impulse. This wasn't about rage. This was about making sure that when I finally moved, they'd never see it coming. This was about being smarter than my anger. Devin texted me that night. "You still holding up?" I told him I was. I didn't tell him about the plan forming in my head, about the calls I'd been making during my lunch breaks, about the lawyer I'd found who did free consultations. I didn't tell him I'd started looking at studio apartments in Metairie, places I could afford alone, places where I could start over without the weight of anyone else's needs on my shoulders. I just told him I was good. Because the truth was, I was better than good. I was focused. I had a target. I knew exactly what I needed to do. The Friday after Thanksgiving, I asked Tasha to add me to the apartment lease. We'd been living there for 3 weeks, and only her name was on it because I'd been working so much I couldn't make it to the leasing office during business hours. She hesitated. She said she'd do it next week, said she'd been busy, said it wasn't urgent. I didn't push. I just nodded and said, "Okay," and watched her relief when I dropped it. That hesitation told me everything. She was keeping her options open. She was keeping the apartment in her name because she knew what was coming. She knew, and she was preparing to push me out of the home I'd paid for. That same night, Jerome told me he'd found a place. Said it was in Kenner, said the rent was cheap, said he'd be out by the 1st of December. I congratulated him. I helped him look up the address online. I asked him questions about the neighborhood. He told me the landlord was a friend of a friend, told me he was getting a good deal, told me things were finally looking up. I smiled and told him I was happy for him. Then I watched the camera feed from work and saw him and Tasha celebrating with champagne I'd bought for New Year's. They toasted to his new place. They kissed. They went into the bedroom I paid for, and I saved every second of it. I stopped sleeping. Not entirely, but enough that my body moved through the days like something mechanical, running on coffee and the cold fuel of what I knew. At the warehouse, Rick kept pushing, kept testing, kept waiting for me to slip. I didn't. I loaded faster, worked cleaner, stayed longer. I made him look petty for watching me so close. By mid-December, he'd backed off, moved on to hassling someone else, frustrated that I wouldn't give him his excuse. I took every extra shift he offered. I needed the money. I needed the distraction. I needed to be anywhere but that apartment, watching them pretend. Jerome's move-out date came and went. December 1st turned into December 5th, turned into the middle of the month. He had excuses. The landlord needed more time. The place wasn't ready. There was a problem with the deposit. Tasha believed him, or pretended to. I didn't say anything. I just watched my uncle settle deeper into my home, watched his clothes spread through the closet I'd been promised, watched him eat breakfast at my table every morning like he'd paid for the chair he sat in. Devin asked me when I was going to make my move. I told him soon. I told him I was waiting for the right moment. I told him patience was part of the plan. Christmas was coming, and Tasha started talking about decorating, about getting a tree, about making the apartment feel like home for the holidays. I gave her money for decorations. I worked overtime to cover it. She bought a tree, lights, ornaments, everything. Jerome helped her set it up while I was at my evening shift. I came home to find them drinking eggnog and watching a Christmas movie, the apartment glowing with lights I'd paid for. Tasha kissed me and told me it looked perfect. I agreed. I sat between them on the couch and watched the end of the movie and felt the weight of my plan settling into place like pieces on a board. I'd been talking to the lawyer, a black woman named Mrs. Simmons who worked out of an office in Mid-City. She did tenant rights cases, evictions, lease disputes. I told her my situation without names, without details that would make it personal. I asked her what rights I had if my name wasn't on a lease but I'd paid for everything. She told me the truth. Without documentation, without proof, without my name on that paper, I had almost nothing. But, she said, if I could prove financial contribution, prove I'd been living there, prove the other party had acted in bad faith, I might have a case. I asked her what kind of proof she needed. She told me. I had everything she asked for and more. On December 20th, I told Tasha I wanted to talk about our future. I took her to dinner at a restaurant in the Quarter, a place we'd been once before when we were happy. I ordered wine I couldn't afford. I held her hand across the table. I told her I loved her. I told her I wanted to marry her, wanted to build a life with her, wanted to make sure we were protected if anything ever happened to me. I asked her, gentle and loving, if she'd be willing to add me to the lease. Make it official. Make us official. She cried. She said yes. She said she'd go to the leasing office the day after Christmas. I kissed her hand and paid the bill and felt absolutely nothing. Jerome called me 2 days later, said he needed to borrow money, said the landlord wanted first and last month's rent up front, said he was $300 short. I told him I didn't have it. He pushed. He said family helped family, said I'd done so much already, said this was the last time he'd ask. I told him I was tapped out from Christmas, from rent, from everything. He got quiet. He said he understood. He said he'd figure it out. That night I watched the camera feed and saw him complaining to Tasha, saw her rub his shoulders and tell him it would be okay, saw her promise to help him. I wondered where she thought that money would come from. I wondered if she cared. I worked Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, and the day after. Triple overtime, holiday pay, every hour I could grab. Tasha spent Christmas with her family. Jerome went with her. I told them I couldn't get the time off, told them I was sorry, told them to have fun without me. When I finally got home late on the 26th, there were leftovers in the fridge and a present under the tree with my name on it. I opened it alone in the dark living room. A watch, a nice one, expensive. I checked the camera footage from 3 days earlier and saw Tasha buying it with a credit card I'd never seen before. I wondered whose name was on that card. I wondered how deep this went. The next morning, Tasha told me she couldn't go to the leasing office, said something came up with her mother, said she'd go next week, said it wasn't a big deal. I told her it was fine. I told her whenever she had time. I told her I trusted her. She smiled and kissed me and left the apartment with Jerome to go help Ms. Patricia with something that probably didn't exist. I sat on the couch and looked at the camera I'd hidden in the smoke detector, the camera they still didn't know about. And I waited. New Year's came cold and clear. I worked the day shift at the warehouse, ran Instacart orders until my car smelled like someone else's groceries, then clocked in at the grocery store for the overnight inventory. I didn't go to any parties. I didn't watch the ball drop. I sat in the break room at 2 a.m. eating a gas station sandwich and watching the camera feed on my phone. Tasha and Jerome were at some house party in the east, someone's cousin's place, drinking and dancing like people without secrets. I watched Tasha kiss him at midnight. I watched him hold her like she was his. Then I turned off my phone and went back to counting cans of soup. January started with ice on the windshields and a coldness in me that had nothing to do with the weather. I'd been documenting for 2 months. I had video evidence, bank statements, receipts, text messages, everything Mrs. Simmons said I'd need. I had proof Tasha hadn't paid her half of the bills since October. I had proof Jerome had been living there rent-free for 3 months. I had proof I'd paid for every stick of furniture, every plate, every towel. And I had proof of what they'd been doing while I worked myself sick to give her the life she said she wanted. Jerome finally admitted there was no apartment in Kenner. Did it casual, over breakfast one Saturday morning, like it was funny. Said the deal fell through, said the landlord was a flake, said he'd keep looking. Tasha told him not to worry, told him he could stay as long as he needed. I was standing right there. They didn't even look at me when they said it. I poured my coffee and went to the bedroom and added the date and time to my notes. 3 months of lies, 3 months of playing me for a fool, 3 months of making themselves comfortable in a space I'd bled for. I started moving my things out slowly. A box here, a bag there, nothing they'd notice right away. My important documents went first. Birth certificate, social security card, Mama's death certificate, the title to my car. Then my clothes, a few at a time, stuffed into a gym bag I'd take to work and store in my trunk. I moved everything to a storage unit in Metairie. A 5x5 I paid for in cash. Devin helped me on his days off, never asking questions, just loading boxes and keeping watch. By the middle of January, everything that mattered to me was out of that apartment. All that was left were the things I'd bought for her. I found the apartment I wanted in late January. A studio in Metairie, small and clean, $400 a month including utilities. The landlord was an older Vietnamese woman who didn't care about my credit score, just wanted first month's rent and a $100 deposit. I gave her cash. She gave me the keys, I didn't move in yet. I kept paying rent at the place with Tasha, kept up appearances, kept playing the role. But now I had somewhere to go. Now I had a door I could close that would lock them out forever. Tasha started asking me if something was wrong. Said I seemed distant, said I wasn't talking to her the way I used to, said she missed me. I told her I was just tired from work. I told her I was stressed about money. I told her I loved her and everything was fine. She seemed relieved. She went back to her routine, working her part-time job at the salon, coming home to cook dinner with Jerome, pretending we were a family. I watched them and felt nothing. That's how I knew I was ready. When you can look at the people who destroyed you and feel nothing at all, you're ready to walk away. Rick called me into his office on a Tuesday in February. Sat me down, closed the door, told me he'd been impressed with my work ethic. Said there was a supervisor position opening up, said he was recommending me for it, said it came with a raise, benefits, regular hours. I almost laughed. 6 months ago, he'd been trying to fire me. Now he wanted to promote me. I thanked him. I told him I'd think about it. I walked out of his office knowing I'd never see the inside of that warehouse again after I made my move. The job didn't matter. The money didn't matter. All that mattered was the moment I'd been building toward for 4 months. Mrs. Simmons called me that same week, said she'd reviewed everything I sent her, said I had a strong case, said if I wanted to pursue this legally, she could file the paperwork within a week. I asked her what it would cost. She told me she'd do it pro bono, said she was tired of seeing good men get taken advantage of, said my documentation was some of the best she'd seen. I thanked her. I told her I'd let her know. I sat in my car outside the storage unit and looked at the boxes containing everything I had left, and I made my decision. Valentine's Day fell on a Friday. Tasha had been dropping hints for weeks about wanting to go somewhere nice, somewhere romantic, somewhere that showed I still cared. I made reservations at the same restaurant where I'd asked her about the lease. I bought her roses. I wore the watch she'd given me for Christmas. I picked her up from the salon after her shift, and we drove downtown in the February cold with the radio playing love songs I didn't feel anymore. She held my hand. She smiled. She had no idea what was coming. Dinner was perfect. I ordered wine. We shared an appetizer. I asked her about her day, her dreams, her plans for the future. She talked about wanting to expand her client base at the salon, maybe rent her own booth someday, maybe even open her own place. I listened and nodded and asked questions that made her light up. I told her I was proud of her. I told her I believed in her. I told her she deserved everything she wanted, and I meant it. I meant every word, because the woman I'd loved deserved all of that. The woman sitting across from me was someone else. After dinner, we walked along the river. The lights from the bridge reflected on the dark water, and the air smelled like winter and the promise of spring coming. Tasha leaned into me, told me this was perfect, told me she loved me. I kissed the top of her head and felt the weight of the ring box in my pocket. The ring I'd bought 3 months ago, before I knew, when I still thought we had a future. I'd planned to propose tonight. That was the old plan, the plan from another life. Now the ring was just weight, just another thing I'd paid for that meant nothing. We got back to the apartment after 10. Jerome was on the couch watching a basketball game, drinking my beer, comfortable in my space. He looked up when we came in, told Tasha she looked beautiful, told me I was a lucky man. I agreed. I got them both beers from the fridge, sat down between them, and watched the rest of the game. Tasha fell asleep with her head on my shoulder. Jerome kept drinking and talking about the players, about the season, about nothing that mattered. I sat there and felt the countdown in my chest. 2 more weeks. 2 more weeks of pretending. Then I'd show them exactly who they'd been playing with. I'd picked March 1st for a reason. That was the day the lease was up for renewal. Tasha would have to either sign a new lease or move out. She'd been avoiding talking about it, changing the subject every time I brought it up, probably hoping I wouldn't notice. But I noticed everything now. I noticed that she'd stopped wearing the necklace I bought her. I noticed that Jerome had stopped pretending to look for apartments. I noticed that they'd both gotten comfortable with the idea that I was too stupid or too tired to see what was right in front of me. Mrs. Simmons had the paperwork ready. All I had to do was say the word, and she'd file it. The suit was for reimbursement of expenses, breach of verbal contract, and unjust enrichment. In plain English, I was suing Tasha for every dollar I'd put into that apartment. Rent, utilities, furniture, deposits, everything. I had receipts for all of it. I had bank statements showing my payments and her lack of contribution. I had video evidence that she'd been living there with another man while I paid the bills. The case was airtight. Mrs. Simmons had told me I'd win. It was just a question of how much. I worked my last shift at the warehouse on February 28th. Told Rick I was taking the supervisor position. Told him I needed 2 weeks to wrap up some personal business. Told him I'd start March 15th. He seemed pleased. He shook my hand and told me I'd earned it. I smiled and thanked him and walked out of that building knowing I'd never be back. The grocery store was next. I gave them my notice the same day, told them family emergency, told them I appreciated the opportunity. They didn't care. They had a replacement by the end of the week. Only the Instacart work would continue, because I could do that anywhere, on my own time, answering to no one. On the night of February 28th, I sat in my car outside the apartment and looked at the windows glowing on the second floor. I'd paid for the electricity keeping those lights on. I'd paid for the heat keeping them warm. I'd paid for the roof keeping them dry. And in 12 hours, they'd know exactly what that meant. I opened my phone, pulled up the camera feed one last time, and watched Jerome and Tasha cooking dinner together in my kitchen, laughing about something I couldn't hear. I closed the app. I started the car. I drove to my studio in Metairie and slept in my own bed for the first time in 6 months. I woke up March 1st in a room that held nothing but what I needed. A bed, a lamp, a table, a chair. The walls were bare. The silence was complete. I made coffee in a pot I'd bought at the dollar store and sat by the window watching the sun come up over a neighborhood I didn't know. My phone was off. My plan was in motion. Mrs. Simmons would file the paperwork at 9. The process server would deliver it to Tasha at the salon by noon, and by tonight everyone would know what I'd known for 4 months. I turned my phone on at 8. 37 missed calls from Tasha. 14 from Jerome. 23 text messages asking where I was, if I was okay, what was happening. I deleted them all without reading past the first line. Then I called Devin and told him it was done. He asked me if I was sure. I told him I'd never been more sure of anything in my life. He said he'd keep his phone on, said if I needed anything to call. I told him I wouldn't need anything. This wasn't the kind of situation where backup helped. This was the kind of situation where you stood alone and watched the fire burn. The process server called me at 12:15. Professional, brief, to the point. He'd delivered the papers to Natasha Marie Williams at Glam and Grace Salon on Broad Street. She'd signed for them. He'd done his job. I thanked him and hung up. Then I sat in my empty studio and waited for what came next. It came faster than I expected. My phone rang at 12:45. Tasha's number. I let it ring through to voicemail. She called back immediately. Again. I turned off the ringer and watched the screen light up with her face. The photo I'd taken of her last summer when we'd driven out to the lake and she'd laughed at something I said. She wasn't laughing now. The voicemail started coming through. Her voice shaking, confused, angry, desperate. Asking what this was. Asking if it was a joke. Asking me to call her back so we could talk about it. Asking me to please just talk to her. I listened to the first one. Then I deleted the rest without playing them. There was nothing she could say that would change what was happening. She'd made her choices. I'd made mine. Now we both had to live with them. Jerome called from his own phone around 2. I answered. He deserved to hear my voice. Deserved to know I was awake and aware and choosing this. His tone was smooth, conciliatory, the voice of a man trying to talk his way out of trouble. He said there must be some mistake, said we should sit down and handle this like family, said I was being rash and needed to think about what I was doing. I listened to him talk for 30 seconds. Then I said 4 words. "I saw you, Jerome." The silence that followed lasted forever. Then he hung up. Mrs. Simmons called at 3. The opposing party had contacted her office, she said, asking about settlement options. She wanted to know if I was interested in mediation. I asked her what they were offering. She laughed, short and sharp. "Nothing," she said. "They were offering nothing and asking me to drop the suit." I told her to proceed with everything. She said the court date was set for April 15th. I thanked her. She told me to stay strong. Told me I was doing the right thing. Told me she'd seen too many good men get walked over by people who saw kindness as weakness. I believed her. I spent the rest of the day moving the last of my things from the storage unit into the studio. My life fit into 8 boxes and 3 bags. Everything else, the couch, the TV, the kitchen table, the bed frame, all of it, I'd bought for that apartment, and I'd listed every item in the lawsuit with receipts attached. Mrs. Simmons had told me I could claim it all or force them to buy me out at fair market value. I chose the money. I didn't want anything that had been in a space where they'd betrayed me. I wanted them to pay for it in dollars, wanted them to feel it every time they wrote a check. Tasha showed up at the warehouse at 5:30. I wasn't there, but Rick called me and told me a woman had come looking for me, crying, saying it was an emergency. He'd told her I didn't work there anymore. She'd asked where I'd gone. He'd told her he didn't know. Rick asked me if everything was all right, if he needed to call security about her. I told him it was personal business, told him it was handled, told him I'd see him in 2 weeks when I started the supervisor job. I lied smoothly. I was never going back. That part of my life was over. Devin texted me that evening. She's at my place, asking questions, crying, says she needs to talk to you. What you want me to tell her? I told him to tell her nothing. Tell her he didn't know where I was. Tell her he hadn't talked to me. Devin sent back a thumbs up and then, "She's saying it's not what you think, saying Jerome took advantage, saying she made a mistake." I read the message twice and felt nothing. If there had been a time when those words would have mattered, that time was gone. I'd spent 4 months watching them together. I'd seen the truth with my own eyes. Whatever story she was building now was just another lie. The first week of March passed in a strange kind of peace. I worked my Instacart shifts, kept my phone off most of the time, lived in my small clean space like a man learning to breathe again. The studio had one window that faced east, and every morning the light came through at an angle that made the bare walls glow. I'd sit there with my coffee and watch the day start and feel something like relief spreading through my chest. I'd forgotten what it felt like to live without watching my back, without wondering what was happening behind closed doors while I worked myself to exhaustion. Tasha kept trying. She found my email address and sent long messages explaining, apologizing, begging. She said Jerome had manipulated her, said he'd told her I was cheating, said he'd gotten her drunk and confused and she didn't know what she was doing. She said she loved me, said we could fix this, said she'd do anything. I read the first email. It was well written, convincing, the kind of story that might have worked if I hadn't watched them together for months, if I hadn't seen her smile, if I hadn't seen her feed him strawberries and slow dance with him and kiss him at midnight. I deleted the rest without reading them. Mrs. Simmons sent me the itemized list of what they owed. Rent for 6 months, $4,800, split in half meant Tasha owed $2,400. Utilities for 6 months, another $800. Furniture and household items, $3,200, all purchased by me with receipts to prove it. Security deposit, $1,200, paid entirely by me. Total, $7,600 plus court costs and legal fees. The number sat on the page like a weight, like a proof of everything I'd given to build a life with someone who'd thrown it away for my uncle. Jerome called me from a number I didn't recognize. I answered because I was curious what he'd say now that the initial shock had worn off. His voice was different this time. Angry, defensive, mean. He told me I was making a mistake, told me family didn't do this to family, told me I was going to regret going after him and Tasha like this. I let him talk. When he was done, I asked him one question. "Did you ever actually have an apartment in Kenner?" The silence told me everything. Then he said I was a fool for taking him in, said I'd always been weak just like my father, said the whole family knew I was a mark. I hung up. I added his words to my notes. Confession by insult. The leasing office called Tasha on March 5th. I knew because Mrs. Simmons got a copy of the correspondence. They wanted to know if she was renewing the lease or vacating. She asked for an extension to decide. They gave her until March 15th. That gave her 10 days to figure out how to pay rent on her own or find somewhere else to go. I knew her salon money wouldn't cover it. I knew Jerome's disability check wouldn't help. I knew they'd put themselves in a position where they needed me, and I was gone. The math was simple and cruel and exactly what they deserved. Devin came by my studio on March 7th, brought beer and takeout from the seafood place on Veterans. We sat on the floor because I didn't have a couch yet and ate fried catfish while he told me what was happening on the outside. Tasha had been calling him daily, he said. Jerome had shown up at his job asking questions. People in the neighborhood were talking, saying I'd abandoned my girl, saying I'd turned my back on family. Devin asked me if I cared what people thought. I told him I didn't. Let them talk. Let them think whatever they wanted. The people who mattered would see the truth eventually. The rest didn't matter at all. I started going to the gym near my apartment. Not to get bigger or stronger, just to move, to burn off the energy that came from rebuilding a life from scratch. I'd run on the treadmill until my legs shook and my lungs burned and I couldn't think about anything but the next step. Then I'd shower and go to work and come home to my quiet studio and sleep without dreams. It was a simple life, almost monastic, and I found I didn't mind it. After months of chaos and lies and watching my back, simple felt like luxury. Miss Patricia called me on March 10th. That surprised me. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Her voice was soft, sad, disappointed. She said Tasha had told her everything, said she was sorry for what her daughter had done, said she'd raised her better than that. She asked me if there was any way to fix it, any chance I'd consider talking to Tasha and working things out. I told her the truth, that I'd loved her daughter, that I'd given everything I had to build a future with her, and that she'd destroyed it with choices that couldn't be undone. Miss Patricia was quiet for a long time. Then she said she understood. She said she hoped I'd find peace. I told her I already had. The court date was set for April 15th, but things started moving faster than expected. On March 12th, Mrs. Simmons called to tell me Tasha's lawyer, some kid fresh out of Loyola who was probably doing it cheap, had filed a motion to dismiss. Their argument was that we'd been in a relationship, that my contributions were gifts, not loans, and that I had no legal standing to demand repayment. Mrs. Simmons laughed when she read it to me. She said it was amateur work, said the video evidence alone would destroy that argument, said we'd have it thrown out within a week. She was right. The judge denied the motion on March 18th. That same week, I got a message from someone I hadn't heard from in years. Marcus, my cousin on my mother's side, the one who'd moved to Atlanta after Katrina and never looked back. He'd heard about the situation through the family grapevine, and he wanted me to know he had my back. He said Jerome had always been trash, said the whole family knew it, but nobody wanted to say it out loud. He said our grandmother had cut Jerome off years ago for stealing from her purse, said the man had been running scams and using people his whole life. I thanked Marcus for reaching out. I asked him why nobody had warned me. He said he thought I knew. He said he thought everybody knew. The eviction notice went out on March 20th. Tasha hadn't paid April's rent, hadn't given the leasing office an answer about renewal, had basically gone silent and hoped the problem would solve itself. It wouldn't. The notice gave them 5 days to pay or vacate. I heard about it through Mrs. Simmons, who heard about it through the property management company's lawyer. She asked me if I felt bad. I told her I felt nothing. Tasha had chosen to put the apartment in her name only. She'd chosen to stop paying her share. She'd chosen to let another man live there rent-free. Now she was living with those choices. I saw her on March 23rd. Pure coincidence. I was doing an Instacart delivery in the quarter, and she was walking out of a boutique on Magazine Street. She looked smaller than I remembered, thinner, tired. Our eyes met across the street. She started walking toward me. I got in my car and drove away. There was nothing to say. We'd say everything that needed saying in court. Until then, she was a stranger who happened to have my history. I checked my rearview mirror and watched her standing on the sidewalk, watching me go. Jerome moved first. I found out through Devin, who'd kept his ear to the ground like I'd asked. Jerome had gone back to his sister's place in Algiers, the same sister who'd kicked him out 2 years ago for not paying rent. She'd taken him back because family was family, because that's what people did even when they knew better. I wondered how long it would last this time. I wondered if he'd told her about Tasha, about what he'd done, about why his nephew was suing him. Probably not. Men like Jerome never told the whole truth. They edited their stories until they were the victims. The settlement offer came on March 27th. Tasha's lawyer proposed I accept $2,000 and drop the suit. Mrs. Simmons called me laughing. She said it was insulting, said it wasn't even a third of what they owed, said we should reject it and push forward. I told her to reject it. The lawyer came back 2 days later with a second offer, $4,000 and a payment plan for the rest. Still, no. I hadn't come this far to settle for less than what I was owed. I hadn't documented everything, gathered evidence, and walked away from my old life just to let them buy their way out cheap. I got the supervisor job at a different warehouse. Not Rick's place. I'd never gone back there like I said I would. Instead, I'd applied at a competitor across town, used my experience and my work history, and got hired at a higher rate with better benefits. The manager who interviewed me was a black woman named Teresa, who'd worked her way up from loading docks to running the whole facility. She liked me immediately, said she could tell I was serious, said she needed people who understood what it meant to work. I started April 1st. Regular hours, decent pay, respect. It felt like winning. Devin threw me a small birthday party at his place on April 3rd. Just him, his daughter, and a couple of guys from his security company. They got me a cake, gave me a bottle of bourbon, told me I was looking better than I had in months. Devin's daughter, who was 7 and brilliant, asked me why I looked so happy if I'd just had a breakup. I told her sometimes losing the wrong person feels like finding yourself. She thought about that and nodded like it made perfect sense. Kids understood truth better than adults. They hadn't learned to complicate it yet. April 15th came with rain. I wore a suit I'd bought at a thrift store in Metairie, pressed and clean, dark blue with a white shirt and a tie my mother had given me before she died. Mrs. Simmons met me outside the courthouse on Poydras Street, carrying a leather folder thick with documents. She looked at me and smiled. She said I looked ready. I told her I was. We walked inside together, through security, up the elevator to the 3rd floor where civil cases were heard. Tasha was already there with her lawyer, sitting on a bench in the hallway. She looked up when I passed. I didn't look back. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, wood-paneled and formal, with the state seal behind the judge's bench and an American flag in the corner. Judge Williams, no relation to Tasha, just unfortunate coincidence, was a thin white man in his 60s who looked bored before we even started. Mrs. Simmons had warned me about him, said he was fair but impatient, said we needed to be clear and concise and let the evidence speak. I sat at the plaintiff's table and folded my hands and waited while the bailiff called the case. William Johnson versus Natasha Williams. Case number 2025 CV 04721. Tasha's lawyer went first. He argued that the relationship had been domestic in nature, that my payments were made voluntarily as part of cohabitating, that there was no written agreement obligating his client to repay anything. He was young and nervous and kept glancing at his notes. Judge Williams listened without expression. When the lawyer finished, the judge asked him if he had any evidence that the defendant had contributed financially to the apartment. The lawyer said she'd paid for groceries and utilities sometimes. Judge Williams asked for documentation. The lawyer didn't have any. The judge made a note and looked at Mrs. Simmons. She stood and laid out the case like she was building a house. First, the lease agreement showing only Tasha's name despite my request to be added. Then, bank statements showing my payments for rent, always on time, for 6 months. Then, receipts for furniture, deposits, utilities, every dollar accounted for and documented. Then, text messages where I asked Tasha about her half of the bills and she made excuses. Then, the video evidence. Mrs. Simmons played 30 seconds of footage. Jerome and Tasha in the kitchen, kissing, laughing, comfortable. Judge Williams leaned forward. Tasha's lawyer objected. The judge overruled him. Mrs. Simmons played another clip, then another. I watched Tasha while the videos played. She kept her eyes down, her hands twisted in her lap, her whole body shrinking into the chair beside her lawyer. Jerome wasn't there. He'd been served with papers as a co-defendant but hadn't bothered to show up, hadn't hired a lawyer, had basically admitted guilt by absence. Mrs. Simmons had told me that would work in our favor. It showed exactly who he was, a man who took what he wanted and ran when there were consequences. Judge Williams asked Tasha's lawyer if he had any rebuttal to the video evidence. The lawyer asked for a recess to consult with his client. The judge gave him 10 minutes. They came back with another settlement offer, $5,000, paid immediately, case dismissed. Mrs. Simmons looked at me. I shook my head. We'd come too far for half measures. The judge asked if we were rejecting the settlement. Mrs. Simmons said yes. The judge sighed and said we'd proceed to judgment. He reviewed the evidence again, asked a few questions about dates and amounts, then sat back in his chair and was quiet for what felt like forever. Finally, he ruled. Judgment for the plaintiff in the amount of $7,600, plus court costs and reasonable attorney fees. Payment due within 30 days or subject to garnishment and collection. Tasha made a sound like something breaking. Her lawyer put his hand on her shoulder. Judge Williams banged his gavel and moved on to the next case. Just like that, it was over. Mrs. Simmons shook my hand and told me she'd file for the attorney fees separately, told me to expect the money within 45 days once the collection process started. I thanked her. I walked out of that courtroom without looking back, down the elevator, through the lobby, out into the rain. I stood on the sidewalk and let the water hit my face and felt something like completion settling into my bones. Devin was waiting in his car across the street. I'd asked him to come, just to be there, just to witness the end. I got in, and he handed me a towel and asked how it went. I told him we won. He nodded like he'd never doubted it. We drove to a bar on Magazine Street and had one drink, just one, to mark the moment. Then he drove me back to my studio and told me he was proud of me. Told me a lot of men would have fought with their fists or walked away with nothing. Told me I'd done it the right way, the hard way, the way that meant something. I believed him. I slept that night like I hadn't slept in a year. Deep and dreamless, the kind of sleep that comes after finishing something that nearly broke you. When I woke up the next morning, the sun was streaming through my window and my phone was off and I had nowhere I needed to be. I made coffee. I sat in my one chair and looked at my empty walls and thought about what came next. Not revenge, not anger, just life. Just the simple act of building something new on ground I'd cleared myself. The money came on May 16th, exactly 31 days after the judgment. A check for $7,600 made out to William Johnson, drawn on Tasha's bank account. Mrs. Simmons called to tell me it had been paid in full. No games, no delays. She sounded almost disappointed that there wouldn't be a collection fight. I asked her about the attorney fees. She said another $2,200, likely to come through in 2 weeks. I thanked her for everything. She told me to stay strong, stay smart, and never let anyone use my kindness as a weapon again. I told her I wouldn't. I deposited the check at my bank in Metairie, watched the teller process it, watched the balance in my account jump to a number I hadn't seen since before my mother got sick. $7,600. It wasn't wealth. It wasn't even that much money in the grand scheme of things. But it was mine. Earned twice. Once by working myself to exhaustion, and once by standing up for myself when it would have been easier to walk away with nothing. I drove back to my studio and sat in my car for a long time, just breathing, just being still, just letting myself feel what victory felt like when it came quiet and cold instead of loud and hot. I bought furniture. Nothing fancy, nothing expensive, just the basics. A couch from a discount store, a real bed frame to replace the mattress on the floor, a small kitchen table with 2 chairs, dishes, towels, things that made the studio feel like a home instead of a place I was hiding. Devin helped me move it all in on a Saturday morning, and afterward we sat on my new couch drinking beer and watching a Saints game on my laptop. He told me the place looked good. I told him it felt good. He asked me if I'd heard from Tasha. I told him no, and I didn't expect to. But I did hear from Jerome. Not directly. He wasn't that brave. Through my cousin Marcus, who called me on a Tuesday night and said Jerome had been asking around about me, trying to figure out where I was living, saying he needed to talk. Marcus had told him nothing, but he wanted to warn me to be careful, said Jerome was the kind of man who held grudges, who might try something stupid. I told Marcus I appreciated the warning. I didn't tell him I'd been careful my whole life, and it had gotten me nowhere. I'd be smart now instead. Smart meant being aware, being prepared, but not being afraid. Work at the new warehouse was good. Teresa ran a tight operation, respected her people, didn't tolerate drama or laziness. I fell into a rhythm. Up at 5, at work by 6, home by 3, evenings to myself. I started taking night classes at Delgado Community College, business management courses that I'd been putting off for years. If I was going to rebuild, I was going to rebuild everything. Not just my living situation, but my future. I was 28 years old. I'd lost 2 years to Tasha and Jerome. I wasn't losing any more time to anything that didn't serve my goals. The attorney fees came through on May 20th, $2,200, just like Mrs. Simmons had estimated. I paid her half in cash as a thank you, even though she'd done the work pro bono. She tried to refuse. I insisted. She'd given me more than legal representation. She'd given me proof that the system could work if you had documentation, patience, and someone who believed in you. That was worth more than money. But the money was all I had to give, so I gave it. She accepted it, hugged me, and told me to call her if I ever needed anything. I told her I would. I saw Ms. Patricia one more time. I was doing an Instacart delivery in the 7th Ward, and she was on her porch watering plants. She saw me carrying groceries to her neighbor's house and called my name. I almost kept walking, but something in her voice made me stop. I set down the bags and walked over to her gate. She looked older than I remembered, tired in a way that had nothing to do with age. She told me Tasha had moved to Houston, said she was staying with a cousin, starting over. She didn't mention Jerome. She asked me if I was happy. I told her I was getting there. She nodded and said that was all anyone could ask for. Then she went inside, and I finished my delivery. Devin's daughter asked me to come to her school's career day. She wanted me to talk about warehouse management, about working my way up, about setting goals and achieving them. I said yes. I showed up in my work clothes with a PowerPoint I'd made the night before, and I talked to a classroom of second graders about the value of hard work and documentation and standing up for yourself when people tried to take advantage. They asked good questions. One kid asked if I'd ever been fired. I told him no, but I'd quit jobs that didn't respect me. Another kid asked if I'd ever been scared to start over. I told her yes, but I did it anyway. That was the lesson. Do it anyway. Summer came hot and thick. I kept working, kept studying, kept building my life one small decision at a time. I started dating someone I met at the gym, a woman named Angela who taught elementary school and had no idea about my history. I didn't tell her right away. When I finally did, 3 months in, she listened to the whole story without interrupting. Then she asked me one question. "Are you over it?" I told her the truth. I wasn't over it. I'd probably never be completely over it. But I wasn't controlled by it anymore. She accepted that. We kept seeing each other. It felt like progress. By August, I'd saved enough to move to a bigger place, a one-bedroom in Metairie, closer to work, with a balcony that overlooked a courtyard full of live oaks. Angela helped me move, along with Devin and a couple guys from the warehouse. We made a day of it. Boxes and furniture and laughter and pizza afterward on my new balcony. Angela asked me if this felt like home. I told her it felt like mine, which was better. Home was something other people had given me and then taken away. This was something I'd built myself, paid for with money I'd earned and recovered, filled with things I'd chosen. Nobody could take this from me. I got promoted to assistant manager in September. Teresa called me into her office and told me I'd earned it. Told me she'd been watching how I handled the crew, how I solved problems, how I showed up every day with the same steady energy. The raise was substantial. The responsibility was real. I accepted it and felt something click into place inside me, a sense that I was finally moving forward instead of just recovering from the past. That night, I took Angela to dinner at a nice restaurant, and when she asked what we were celebrating, I told her everything. The promotion, yes, but also the fact that I'd made it through to the other side of the worst thing that had ever happened to me. Tasha sent me a Facebook message in October. I almost deleted it without reading, but curiosity won out. It was long, rambling, full of apologies and explanations and justifications. She said Jerome had lied to her, manipulated her, made her believe things that weren't true. She said she'd been depressed and vulnerable and looking for something I wasn't giving her. She said she was in therapy now, working on herself, learning about her patterns. She said she hoped I could forgive her someday. I read it twice. Then I blocked her. Forgiveness wasn't something I owed her. Peace was something I'd found without her input, and I wasn't interested in reopening old wounds so she could feel better about the scars she'd left. Jerome, I heard through the family grapevine, had moved to Texas, some town outside of Dallas where he knew someone who could get him work. Marcus called to tell me, asked if I was worried he'd try to contact me. I wasn't. Jerome was a coward who only operated when he thought he had the advantage. I'd taken that advantage away, exposed him for what he was, cost him whatever respect he might have had left in the family. He'd stay gone. Men like him always did when the con collapsed and the consequences came due. I wished him nothing. Not harm, not healing, just nothing. He was irrelevant to my life now. I finished my first semester at Delgado with straight A's. Business management, accounting, organizational psychology. Subjects I'd never thought I'd care about until I realized they were tools for building the kind of life I wanted. Angela came to watch me present my final project, a case study on ethical leadership that I'd based loosely on my experience with Teresa. Afterward, she told me she was proud of me. I told her I was proud of myself. It was the first time I'd said that out loud and meant it completely. Not proud of my revenge. Not proud of winning. Proud of who I was becoming in the aftermath. The holidays came around again. Thanksgiving, then Christmas, then New Year's. This time, I spent them differently. With Angela's family in Baton Rouge, with Devin and his daughter watching movies and eating too much, with my colleagues from work at a party Teresa threw at her house. I thought about last year, about working triple overtime while Tasha and Jerome celebrated without me. The contrast was stark. Last year, I'd been drowning and didn't know it. This year, I was swimming, strong strokes in clear water, heading toward a shore I could actually see. That was worth more than any revenge. That was freedom. I ran into one of Tasha's friends in January, a woman named Michelle who used to come by the old apartment sometimes. She recognized me at the grocery store and came over to talk. She said she'd heard what happened, said she was sorry, said she'd always liked me. Then she said something that surprised me. She'd known. Not about Jerome specifically, but about Tasha seeing someone. She'd tried to hint at it once, she said, but I'd seemed so happy she didn't want to ruin it. I thanked her for telling me now. I didn't ask why she hadn't said something clearer back then. People protected their friends. I understood that. I just wish someone had protected me. Angela and I had been together for 8 months when she asked me if I'd ever want to live with someone again. We were on my balcony, drinking wine, watching the oak trees move in the wind. I told her the truth. Yes, eventually, with the right person, under the right circumstances. She asked what those circumstances were. I told her. Equal contribution, equal names on the lease, equal respect, complete honesty. She nodded and said that sounded reasonable. She didn't push. She just let the conversation settle and change the subject. But I thought about it afterward. Thought about how different it felt to have that discussion with someone who valued the same things I did. With someone who saw partnership as balance instead of as opportunity. By March, exactly 1 year after everything fell apart, I'd built a life that looked nothing like what I'd planned but felt more solid than anything I'd had before. The studio had become the 1-bedroom, had become a 2-bedroom apartment. Angela and I were talking about sharing. The warehouse job had become management, had become a career path with real potential. The pain had become fuel, had become growth, had become wisdom. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw someone different from the exhausted man who'd opened that door with a box in his hands and found his world destroyed. I saw someone who'd survived, adapted, and refused to let betrayal define him. Teresa offered me a position at the company's new facility in Slidell. More money, more responsibility, a chance to help build something from the ground up. I asked for a week to think about it. Angela and I talked it through. The commute, the opportunity, what it would mean for our future. She told me she'd support whatever I decided. That mattered. Having someone who saw my potential and wanted me to reach it without needing to diminish themselves in the process, that was what I'd been missing with Tasha. That was what partnership was supposed to look like. I accepted the position. We started looking at apartments in Slidell together. I went back to the old neighborhood one last time in April. Not to the apartment. I had no interest in seeing that place again. But to Ms. Patricia's house, because she'd called and asked me to stop by if I ever had time. She was on the porch when I pulled up, older and smaller than I remembered, but still strong in the way women like her always were. She invited me in for coffee. We sat in her kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd eaten Thanksgiving dinner 2 years ago, and she told me she was proud of how I'd handled everything. She said a lot of men would have turned bitter or violent. I'd turned strategic and come out stronger. She told me Tasha was engaged to someone in Houston, some man she'd met at her new job. Miss Patricia didn't sound happy about it. She said her daughter was rushing again, making the same mistakes, looking for someone to save her instead of saving herself. I listened and didn't comment. Tasha's life wasn't my concern anymore. Miss Patricia asked me if I was happy. I told her I was. She asked me if I'd forgiven her daughter. I told her I'd released her, which wasn't the same thing but was close enough. She understood. She hugged me when I left and told me to take care of myself. I promised I would. Devin told me Jerome had been arrested in Texas for passing bad checks. Some scheme he'd run trying to get deposits on apartments he had no intention of renting. It was small-time, pathetic. Exactly what I would have expected from a man who'd spent his whole life looking for easy money instead of earning it. I asked Devin if he thought I should feel vindicated. He said I should feel nothing. Jerome had always been headed for a cell or a grave. My lawsuit hadn't changed his trajectory. It had just removed me from his orbit before he pulled me down with him. That was the real victory. I proposed to Angela on a Saturday in May. Nothing elaborate, nothing public, just the two of us on my balcony with wine and the sunset and a ring I'd saved for over 4 months. She said yes before I finished asking. We set the date for next spring, started planning small, started talking about the future in concrete terms. She wanted kids eventually. I did too. She wanted to travel. So did I. She wanted a partner who showed up, communicated, carried his weight, and expected the same in return. I was that person now. I'd learned how to be through the hardest lesson of my life. My cousin Marcus called to tell me our grandmother had died. She was 93, had lived a full life, was ready to go. The funeral was in 2 weeks. He asked if I was coming. I said yes. He asked if I knew Jerome would probably be there. I said I didn't care. I'd faced worse things than my uncle in a church. At the funeral, I saw him across the room, grayer, thinner, smaller somehow. Our eyes met once. I looked through him like he was glass. Then I turned to comfort my cousins and pay my respects to the woman who'd raised my mother. Jerome left early. I stayed until the end. The new facility in Slidell opened in June. I was there on day one, helping set up systems, training new hires, building the kind of team I'd want to work for. Teresa visited twice in the first month and told me I was exceeding expectations. I told her I'd learned from the best. She laughed and said I'd better not leave for a competitor. I promised I wouldn't. This was my place now. These were my people. This was the future I'd built out of the ashes of a past that had tried to burn me down. I'd survived the fire. Now I was building something fireproof. Angela and I moved to Slidell in July. A small house with a yard, both our names on the mortgage, equal down payment, equal responsibility. On moving day, I stood in the doorway with a box in my hands, the same position I'd been in 2 years ago, and felt nothing but hope. This time, I knew what was on the other side of that door. This time, I'd built it myself. This time, nobody could take it from me. Angela came up behind me and asked if I was okay. I told her I'd never been better, and for the first time in years, that was the absolute truth. The wedding was small and perfect. 50 people in a garden in City Park, Angela in a simple white dress, me in a suit I'd bought specifically for this day, Devin as my best man, and Teresa in the front row smiling like a proud parent. The minister asked if anyone objected to the union. The silence was complete. Nobody from my old life was there to poison this moment. When I kissed my wife, I felt the final piece of the past fall away. I wasn't the man who'd been betrayed anymore. I was the man who'd rebuilt himself and found someone worth building with. The reception was at a restaurant in mid-city. Good food and better company, people who'd supported me through the dark times and celebrated with me now. Devin gave a toast that made people laugh and cry, talking about resilience and brotherhood and what it meant to watch someone rise from their lowest point. Angela's father gave a toast welcoming me to the family, saying he'd never seen his daughter happier. I gave a toast thanking everyone for believing in me when I'd almost stopped believing in myself. Then we danced and ate cake and forgot about everything but the moment we were in. On our honeymoon in Destin, lying on the beach with my wife beside me, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The 3 jobs, the exhaustion, the betrayal, the discovery, the cold calculation, the lawsuit, the victory, the rebuilding. Every step had been necessary. Every choice had led me away from who I'd been and toward who I needed to become. I thought about Tasha sometimes, wondered if she was happy in Houston, if she'd learned anything, if she ever thought about what she'd thrown away. Then I stopped wondering. Her story wasn't mine anymore. We came back from the honeymoon to our house in Slidell, to jobs we both loved, to a life we'd built with intention and equality. Angela started her new teaching position at the elementary school 3 blocks from our house. I continued building the warehouse team, mentoring young guys who reminded me of myself at 25. Hungry, hard-working, looking for someone to believe in them. I gave them what I'd needed back then: fair treatment, honest feedback, and a chance to prove themselves. Some of them thrived, some didn't. That was life. You could only control your own choices. In September, 2.5 years after I'd opened that door and found my world destroyed, I got a letter. No return address, postmarked from Dallas. I knew who it was from before I opened it. Jerome's handwriting, shaky and uncertain, filled 2 pages with something that was supposed to be an apology. He said he'd been wrong. Said he'd let jealousy and bitterness control him. Said he'd seen how hard I worked and resented me for making him look lazy. Said sleeping with Tasha had been about hurting me, not about wanting her. Said prison had given him time to think. Said he hoped someday I could forgive him. I read the letter once, then I burned it in the fire pit in our backyard and watched the smoke rise into the autumn sky. Forgiveness wasn't something I owed him. He'd stolen from me. Time, money, trust, family. He'd done it deliberately, knowingly, while I fed him and sheltered him and treated him like blood. His regret now, years later, from a cell where he couldn't hurt anyone else, meant nothing. I'd moved past needing his apology. I'd moved past needing anything from him at all. The fire consumed his words, and I went inside to have dinner with my wife. Angela got pregnant in November. We'd been trying for a few months, not obsessively, just letting nature take its course. When she showed me the test, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Pure, uncomplicated joy. No fear, no waiting for the other shoe to drop, just happiness that we were creating something together. We told our families at Thanksgiving. Ms. Patricia sent a card congratulating us, saying she was happy I'd found peace. I appreciated that. She'd lost her daughter to bad choices, but she'd never lost her grace. That meant something. The baby came in July, a daughter we named Simone after my mother. She had Angela's eyes and my stubborn chin, and holding her in the hospital room, I understood something I'd been circling around for 3 years. The best revenge wasn't what I'd done to Tasha and Jerome. The best revenge was this: building a life so complete, so full, so rich with love and purpose that their betrayal became just a footnote in a much larger story. They'd tried to destroy me. Instead, they'd forced me to rebuild myself into someone stronger, wiser, more intentional, someone capable of being the father and husband I'd always wanted to be. I never saw Tasha again. Heard through the grapevine that her engagement had fallen apart, that she'd moved back to New Orleans, that she was working at a different salon and living with her mother. I felt nothing about it. No satisfaction, no pity, just the mild disinterest you'd feel hearing about a stranger's troubles. She'd made her choices. I'd made mine. Our paths had diverged completely, and that was exactly how it should be. Devin saw her once at a gas station and said she'd asked about me. He'd told her I was married with a kid and doing well. She'd nodded and said she was happy for me. He didn't believe her. Jerome got out of prison after 18 months. Moved to somewhere in Mississippi where he had a cousin who'd give him work. Marcus called to tell me. Asked if I wanted details. I told him no. Jerome was part of a past I'd closed the door on. Whatever he did with the rest of his life was between him and whatever conscience he had left. I had a daughter to raise, a wife to love, a career to build, a future to invest in. I had everything that mattered. He had whatever men like him ended up with. That wasn't my concern. At work, I got promoted to facility manager. The youngest one in the company's history, Teresa told me with pride. She'd moved up to regional director and had recommended me for her old position. It came with a significant raise, real authority, and the kind of responsibility I'd been preparing for since the day I walked away from that apartment in Métairie. I accepted it, knowing I'd earned it. Not through luck or connections, but through showing up every single day and proving I was worth the investment. That was the lesson I'd learned the hard way. Your value isn't what people say it is. It's what you prove it to be. Angela and I bought a bigger house when Simone turned 1. 4 bedrooms in a quiet neighborhood with good schools, a yard big enough for a swing set, space for the family we were planning to grow. On moving day, I stood in the driveway and watched the movers carry our furniture inside, and I thought about the man I'd been 3 years ago. Broken, betrayed, working 3 jobs to afford a place that would never truly be his. That man was gone. In his place stood someone who'd learned that you can't build a future on someone else's foundation. You have to pour your own concrete, set your own stones, and make sure your name is on every document that matters. Now, I want to hear from you. What would you have done in William's place? Leave your comment like this video, and don't forget to subscribe. And if you want another powerful story, click on the video appearing to your left.